Hello and welcome to Ad Age Studio 30 Live. I'm John Dioso, editor of Ad Age Studio 30. Today we're talking about the evolving role of gaming in the advertising ecosystem, how it's grown into a cross-platform environment, and why it's becoming a central piece of omnichannel media strategies. Joining me is Jonathan Stringfield, the Vice President of Global Business Strategy, Analytics, and Trust at Microsoft Advertising. Welcome to Studio 30 Live, Jonathan.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Of course. Great to see you again. And audience members, let us know where you're tuning in from on our social channels. We'd love to give you a shout out later. So, Jonathan, the last time that you and I spoke in December 2022, since then, the industry has transformed dramatically. Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard was big news and created the world's largest game publisher. Gaming has become a true cross-platform daily habit spanning mobile, consoles, and PCs. And new standards from the IAB have given advertisers consistent ways to measure success. So we've seen major advertisers from global CPGs to automotive brands start treating gaming as a core marketing channel, in some cases rivaling or even outpacing TV in reach with younger audiences. So from your perspective, since the last time that we spoke, what's changed most in how big brands view and invest in gaming as part of their media mix?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the case that, when we had a conversation 3 or 4 years ago or however long that was, we talked a lot about the misconceptions and therefore how that was kind of fueling a gap between marketers and the opportunity in gaming. And like some of that still exists, right? Like I definitely think it's the case that a lot of marketers look at the gaming space and have some conceptions that may or may not be true in terms of whether or not their consumers are representative in it. But I think what has shifted is, as you kind of noted, there actually has been a lot of marketing activity, a lot of marketers that have started to lean into this space and do some really innovative activations, and I think that's great. However, in tandem with that, and I think things like Activision Blizzard and how Microsoft has evolved like that are representative of this, the overall opportunity space for marketers within gaming has been expanding at the same time. So even though we're making some real headway in the marketing community, I would say that gap in terms of opportunity, and we can look at this at any empirical measure you want in terms of like time spent versus advertising investment or what have you, is only getting wider. So we're at an interesting place where I think marketers are starting to get it. There's still a lot to be done. And then the opportunity has really never been better than it is today. And again, I think a lot of the things that we're looking at, particularly on the Microsoft side, is really kind of bridging up this more comprehensive consumer touch point across game players with opportunities for marketers that really kind of align with how these individuals are interacting with this ecosystem and allowing marketers a way that's kind of naturalistic to interact with them therein.
Which categories have embraced gaming the fastest, in your opinion, or have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think when you look at the gaming space, folks like to think about, kind of like the endemic categories that are more germane to like young men and so on. But in the same way that, the demographic of gaming is very far away from just being young men, the demographic or that the marketers are going after, and therefore the brands representative are expanding. So on the one hand, you'd expect, to see like a lot of our CPG categories and what have you showing up. And again, like I think we're working across basically all verticals, inclusive ones like entertainment. But I think what often surprises folks is that actually some of our most leaned in partners are in categories like beauty, where, you really have some of the leading brands in terms of really trying to understand the cultural zeitgeist leaning in for that specific reason. I think because they understand that gaming is kind of like leading the way, the future of entertainment, and realistically a good channel to meet not just your consumers of today, but also your consumers tomorrow or the next ones coming up.
So you work with brands to reach players across platforms, as I said before, from mobile to consoles to PCs. What's one common misconception that marketers often bring to the world of gaming?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's misconceptions that marketers have on a more general case that is like them viewing the industry from kind of outside. And then there's a misconception I think that they get when they start to interact with some of these platforms once they start to like look at the opportunities within gaming. So by that, what I mean is, those misconceptions that marketers have when they're kind of like outside in is that, again, kind of what we were talking about before, that gaming is only the domain of young men and so on and so forth. And that's, absolutely not the case. Like we've talked about these stats that your average game player is like 36 years old. They're just as likely to be male or female. Realistically, the makeup of gaming consumers is basically the makeup of your average consumer. Ergo, you can basically reach any consumer through gaming as a platform. Therein, what I have found in conversation with marketers is that once they start to look at the opportunities in gaming, they actually start to get some degree of confusion, because gaming is indeed like not just a platform, it's an ecosystem where billions of players are interacting across a multitude of modalities, but that also it feels to them at first glance kind of limited, that it's like, well, I can kind of do some UGC stuff, or I can kind of do some mobile, but realistically, like, I want the big screen and I want to be able to reach console players and so on. And I think historically, like, it has been a challenge to reach some of these audiences. But that's one of the things that we're particularly excited about at Microsoft, that, to your point before, that Activision Blizzard acquisition, that I come to Microsoft through the acquisition of Activision Blizzard, thereby making Microsoft one of the biggest game publishers in the world, ex-China, adding a significant strength in mobile, and realistically on the consumer side, that allowed from our overall gaming strategy for us to reach game players on console, mobile, and PC platforms via Windows. Now, in terms of our advertising opportunity, that is now something that we can reach as well, right? That we can reach game players with the right activations across console, mobile, and PC, really opening the aperture of potential opportunities for marketers. And I think me now being a part of Microsoft advertising more general is, I think, good representation of the fact that, like, gaming as a platform that we were thinking about is kind of moving from the periphery to really central to what we're doing at Microsoft. Again, in the same way as it's kind of like moving to the center of like culture and entertainment more generally.
All right, I want to get into that cross-platform behavior in a second, but first I want to go back to this. So the previous question was, talking about the surprises, and just a quick follow-up. Does the diversity of audiences still surprise many brands that you meet with when you talk about, you mentioned a beauty category is going deep into gaming now?
Completely.
Is it still surprising?
Completely. I mean, anytime I go and speak with marketers, we almost always have to kind of hit like these, I've started to call them like the quick facts, right? So again, the average age of a game player, like roughly 36. The size of the gaming universe, i.e. game players, about 3.4 billion. The diversity of the audience, again, roughly half male, female. And as you start to trot these out, like every time you see at least a few folks out in the audience go, oh, they kind of have that light bulb moment. And I think that really speaks to the pervasiveness of some of these stereotypes that have been hooked into gaming, that, again, when we think about, a game player, and again, like, I very deliberately try to not to use the term gamer, because the minute you say that, like, again, folks think about young men that play video games and, all the kind of stereotypes around them being in, a dark room with a console and so on and so forth. And to be clear, like, yeah, like a lot of young men play games, but also so does everyone else, right? And so I think that's like one of that first big barrier, that, depending on what category that marketer represents, like, if they do not have, young men as kind of their primary target, they probably dismiss gaming for a while. And then when they kind of understand that there's more possibilities there, then they start to get in a place where they kind of need to challenge themselves. And then that's where the conversation gets interesting, and also highly apropos to that point before about being multi-platform, that, look, if you are looking for moms and household decision makers, like, yeah, there's a good chance we can capture that audience through casual games. If you're looking for, younger audiences that are kind of like more action oriented or what have you, then we can capture them through console experiences. And so now we're having a conversation that's less about a very specific audience and very specific tactics, and more about how can we make this ecosystem work for you and the strategies that you want to enact to really help your brand. And I think that's just a much healthier place for us to be.
All right, let's talk about cross-platform strategy. So how does your player behavior research inform how brands should activate across the different platforms?
I think a lot of what we do, both on the consumer and the advertising side, is completely underpinned by empiricism and understanding of our consumers. So in the same way that, again, we at Microsoft, and you may have seen like some recent like advertising we've done on the consumer side on Xbox, we've gone out with this campaign that said every screen is an Xbox. Well, what do we mean by that? Like, ostensibly, it was talking about this idea that through cloud gaming or what have you, you can take essentially any screen in the consumer internet and you can access Xbox through that. So from the consumer standpoint, that's great, right? And we understand and we know that how consumers want to consume gaming, it's like any other form of media. Like, a good example that I bring to folks who may not be familiar with the gaming ecosystem is like, think about your own behaviors with like streaming television, right? So like a lot of folks might be on an airplane or commuting on the subway or what have you, and you're going to have your show on your phone, right? And so maybe you're watching a little bit of it there. And then let's say you're taking a business trip or something, and now you're at the hotel room and you kind of open up your laptop and okay, you're going to watch it there because that's like a little bit better screen. And now you're back home. and you want to continue to watch your show. It's like, okay, cool. I'm going to throw it up on my television. And again, you get to continue that experience throughout, right? And that's just like good from a consumer standpoint because it kind of fits the ebbs and flows of your life. So things like Xbox being everywhere, things like extensions into mobile allow us to do the same thing with game players because we know from, again, a lot of this consumer research, game players want to consume gaming in similar ways that kind of fit the ebbs and flows of their lives when they're commuting, when they have like more dedicated time, when they have somewhere in between. So again, that's great from a consumer standpoint, but then also allows us to have that much richer conversations in the marketing community. And therein, understanding, again, depending on what the demographic or segment of consumer that the marketer is looking for, understanding who our audiences are and where we're more likely to find them across various modalities, again, whether it's console, PC, or otherwise, and game types, allows us to kind of get directly to having them be in front of the audience they want in a strategy that makes sense to them, and then work on a way to outreach to this audience that kind of fits with the environment, doesn't, create a bad gameplay experience, and ultimately kind of yields a positive benefit both for the marketer and the game player.
Let's let's talk a little bit more about that player behavior. Gamers, despite the diversity of the audience, as you pointed out before, are let's say, what's a nicer way to saying they are very particular, have opinions about things. They're very discerning about the type of experience that they have. And you started to talk a little bit about finding the right moments for brands to engage with the audience. Tell us a little bit more about how Activision Blizzard Media helps brands identify those precise moments for when players are the most engaged and open to receiving those brand messages. So it doesn't, so it is endemic to the actual experience itself.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to the point before in terms of like really understanding our players, not just, again, even from like baseline demographics, but how they think about the gameplay experience. And, without getting into all the, fairly dry, boring academic literature, what I can tell you is that when an individual is playing a game, the psychology that they enact is different than if they were watching TV or scrolling social media or what have you. As you might suspect, it's much more involved, right? And this is what we kind of colloquially call in marketing communities like immersion, right? Like when I'm playing a game, I'm establishing something that psychologists call spatial presence. Like I'm quite literally kind of trying to put myself into the gameplay environment and therefore like, establishing the fiction around me and what have you. So like, again, we call this immersion, like you're really, really into it. And so on the one hand, that's like really powerful, right? What that means is that when someone is engaging with the game, like their attention is ratcheted up to basically 100%. There is no second screening here, right? Like this is them kind of being focused on that particular environment. But to your point, what that also means is you don't want to break that immersion, because the minute you do that, that creates a bad experience. That's where you hear some of the vocalization from the community. And like, it's pretty understandable, right? Like if you're doing something that you care deeply about, dare say even love, and all of a sudden it's interrupted by something that is just like not aligned with that experience, like that's kind of jarring, right? And candidly, like I don't think any of us would like that. So when marketers have approached that space and opportunities have been more aligned with that, i.e. kind of interrupting the experience or otherwise, that's where you start to hear the negative sentiment. But what we try to do, and where we have worked very closely with brands and where we think a lot about this in terms of the product side, is how can we actually integrate this messaging in a way that is additive to the immersion in the best case, or alternatively lives alongside it in a way that provides value to the player. So on the one hand, for like adding immersion, like we can think about, a game that's like Call of Duty, which is a live action one, and you're in like a modern day environment, you see a billboard, I expect to see a brand when I'm on a billboard. So all the better if it's a real brand that's shown there. And again, like that gets to be a place where that's an interesting opportunity for a marketer, but then also isn't breaking my immersion, my spatial presence, my capability to establish fiction while I'm playing the game. Alternatively, in environments like, Xbox or awarded video on King, it might be the case that for participating with a marketer in some way, they get something that is added value to that experience, right? And the net is that in either of these, it's improving the gameplay experience. This is kind of different than I think some of the, other potential marketing channels, insofar that like it really shows a more even relationship between the marketer and the consumer, But in that case, again, I think it's just a healthier relationship for us to have for marketers to show up and kind of know that or indicate that they understand the space. And more importantly, that they appreciate that they can be part of this experience that, again, these players like deeply love.
All right. Well, if you're just joining us, this is Ad Age 3030 Live. I'm John Diosa from Ad Age, and I'm joined by Jonathan Stringfield from Microsoft Advertising. Today, we're discussing how gaming is fueling smarter media strategies. Let me just see how we're doing out there. Okay, great. We're doing great for time there, Jonathan. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Let's get back to the discussion. So, Jonathan, measurement is key for brands, as we've been hearing forever. How does ABM help brands understand what's resonating with players?
Yeah, so my background before I arrived at Activision Blizzard Media, and then now that I'm at Microsoft working across Xbox and what have you, was in measurement research. So as you might suspect, when I came into both the gaming opportunity now at Microsoft Gaming and across the, all the other touch points within our ecosystem, I really look at that through the lens of wanting to make sure that if a marketer is coming to us, they're going to understand their ROI. So I bring all that up because certainly across our mobile suite, increasingly across, what we're doing on console and PC, what we really tried to do is that how a marketer ascertains success. And by that, I mean brand measurements, attribution, anything that's kind of like more germane to what their outcomes are. And then also within the context of the experience, we make sure that we can match that, right? We really want to make sure that, in the same way you would go to a social platform and, perhaps have your video creative there, if you bring that same video creative to us to put into some of our mobile games, that you can measure the efficacy of these things is best like near, side by side as you can. So a long way of saying that, not only do we think measurement's important, I think this is consistently one of these big misconceptions that occurs in gaming, that it's hard to measure. I would argue it's not. I think just on the publisher side, the brands need to be keeping us accountable to have measurement in place. And I think on the Activision Blizzard, the Xbox, the Microsoft advertising side, we've tried to keep ourselves real honest of that. Now, if you're working with a partner that does not have these measurement capabilities built in, then again, I would hold them to that accountability, because not only is that important for marketers, obviously, but frankly, the results I think you will see in gaming will tend to be better than a lot of other channels for a lot of reasons, but basically boiling down to that point we were talking about before, that the amount of attention that individuals are paying to the space is just that much more. So when you do it right and you measure it correctly, you really start to see some powerful outcomes, which starts to then kind of resonate with folks and help them understand like why the space is that much more important.
In addition to attention, what metrics are brands most interested in tracking right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think attention measurement is, this kind of like newer horizon as it pertains to the measurement space more generally. And candidly, an interesting one for us, because objectively, when you look at any empirical measure of attention, like gaming tends to rank extremely high, I think, basically better than any other media channel on the planet. But as of now, a lot of brands don't transact on attention. Now, again, I think there's absolutely space for that. And that's a conversation we should have at an industry level. And I think we are to a certain degree, but they want to look at brand sentiment, right? They want to look at cases, cans, and bottles of product move. They want to look at attribution. So again, depending on the activation, we try to meet those measurement goals. So in short, it's less about, what should they look at gaming specifically, but more what is their strategy and what are they trying to impact within their business, and making sure that we can have the appropriate measurements such that they know what the impact on their business is for the activation within the gaming ecosystem.
Let's talk a little bit about research. Your team is constantly researching the gaming space. What research or insights are most exciting to you and your team right now, especially when it comes to understanding player behavior and brand impact?
I think the one that's been most exciting as of late is as we look across, and again, I think the big difference and what we're very excited about on the Microsoft side, not only being a game publisher, but holding a gaming platform and having advantages like the Windows ecosystem, is starting to understand like how individuals are interacting across the entirety of this space, right? That, gaming and gaming behaviors aren't monolithic. In fact, they are kind of like, depending on the time of day or the need state of the individual or what have you, they have various needs throughout the day that they're going to access the gaming ecosystem in differential ways to sustain them. So I think really understanding that is, again, not only just healthy for us on a more general state to like understand the consumer behaviors around gaming, but again, really to kind of tell this story that, marketing isn't just a static point, right? Like really good marketing should in theory be attuned to the moments of folks' lives where it's relevant. So the more that we understand that on our side, the better that we can be in service to marketers. And I think that also translates to just better overall activations from them. And you take that and you kind of build on some of the work that we've done in the past that, like, look, we think about gaming as just kind of this individual experience. A lot of people play games solo, but it's also increasingly a social occasion. So like even starting to open folks' minds to the different ways that you can think about this platform, not just as a way to kind of reach someone through a single digital channel, but also treating it as a mechanism through which you can influence folks and how their everyday socialization, and how that's like just, again, an increasingly important part of their day.
Yeah, let's get into the next question. I want to expand on that idea a little bit. So, what trends are you watching that could define the next phase of brand integrations in gaming? Whether that's new formats, platforms, or any deeper way to interact with players.
Yeah, I mean, I think where we have a lot of interest is finding the places within the gaming ecosystem where we can make it easier for brands to integrate in a way that is still accretive to game players. Now, again, as you might suspect, that's not necessarily an easy challenge, right? But, yes, there is a lot of custom opportunities in gaming. We do a lot of custom work with a lot of our partners, and like these things are great, right? And like, again, I think we'll see these things in headlines, and they tend to be things that are kind of fun and interactive and what have you. But there are a lot of brands that, that's not really going to fit into kind of like their calendar or any of their marketing strategies for a given quarter, or they might just want to just make sure that they're kind of understanding opportunities in a channel like gaming the same way that they're looking at social or otherwise. So what that means is like, when we look at the kind of the customized space, like absolutely we should keep doing these things, but also like how can we accommodate better, higher quality video? How can we accommodate high quality display? How can we look at the assets that marketers are really kind of using for their bread and butter activations and find a good place that's effective for them in this ecosystem, but again, also fits with the experience for game players. So I think the more that we can kind of push on that, that has two advantages. One of which is that it starts to break down some of these misconceptions because it allows for marketers to look at gaming less as an innovation channel and more just an activation channel in the same way they would with other forms of digital media. And then on the publisher side, it allows us to be a little bit more flexible and be in dialogue with brands such that we understand their needs in the same way that we really understand the game players and their needs therein, and really find a more naturalistic fit. And I think this is, again, a good thing for the marketing community, but also a good thing for the game publishers in general, the more that we can kind of crack this challenge.
Let's talk about interacting with audiences. You talked a lot about actually within the environment, within the gaming ecosystem itself. What about beyond the ecosystem, like live experiences, versus the virtual experience that that brands are integrating in within the gaming ecosystem? What about beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, another way that's kind of helpful to frame this is, even for brands and marketers who aren't familiar with, gaming as an ecosystem, they probably understand like the movie industry, right? They probably understand the sports industry. And when we think about core game production and how these things are released and, how they're received, it's not exactly a one-to-one match. But if we think about the movie industry, like, look, Unpack, fan activations, fan expos, things of this nature, all sorts of artifacts that exist in the real world, like all of these are very germane to gaming, and all of these are things that we can talk about. On things like the sporting edge, like, again, we've talked for years about, esports and the potentiality there. And like, again, a lot of potential opportunities on that side as well. So on the one hand, gaming as an entertainment platform, if you think about any other piece of entertainment, again, whether it's a streaming show or movie or what have you, and all the ways that it kind of lives outside of the core experience, you will find the same on gaming, right? And that's an interesting conversation to have. But then above and beyond that, we tend to think about gaming as, again, kind of this static behavior, i.e. I'm sitting in my living room and I have a controller and I'm in front of a television. When realistically, what's much more likely is, again, things like mobile phones, but also the proliferation of mobile PCs and what have you that really kind of make gaming something that occurs out in the wild. So long way of saying you have these artifacts that are kind of just beyond the core experience. And then I would also argue the proliferation of gaming as an IP outside of the bounds of the gaming ecosystem. So by that, I mean, if you look at the host of television shows these days, which are now taking gaming IP and adapting it, we're now also getting into a world where, even if you've never touched a game controller, it's really, really difficult to not have any influence from gaming media. And I think like in the future, as these types of behaviors continue to expand and we start to do more of these partnerships or what have you, things like transmedia, things like having multiple touch points for fandoms across the entire ecosystem should, one, become that much more naturalistic, but then two, I think that much more beneficial for brands who are really leaning into this space.
All right, we just have a few minutes left, and I'd like you to just take a look, or just offer for brands who are still looking to take the next step into gaming. Let's start with the beginning. What's the first question that they should be asking themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think their first question in this, and again, I've kind of had this point for a while, and it sounds like it's very basic, but it's nonetheless true, is what is your strategy? And by that, what I mean is what we've seen, that there's a behavior that because gaming tends to be like this newer platform or in the innovation budget, people tend to come to gaming because they need to check the box on a gaming strategy. I want to challenge that. I think what they should be looking at the gaming space is like, what is the strategy you are trying to do for your core marketing outcomes? And then find a partner that you can work with and you can trust, and try to figure out like, how can you actually enact these strategies through gaming as a massive media channel in the same way and rivaling, if not greater than, things like CTV streaming or otherwise. Because that's where I think you're going to find the most effective outcomes when we stop thinking about this as a kind of check the box exercise for being innovative and what have you, and more as a real mechanism to drive results for marketers.
For marketers who are still considering or really seriously looking into adding gaming to their media mix, should they consider this as budget that's shifting? You mentioned CTV before. Is it shifting from CTV, or is this just new incremental spend?
Well, I mean, marketing is a zero-sum game, right? So like, we could have the long conversation in terms of like the ebbs and flows of marketers' budgets, but the net out is like, we understand on our side, and it's certainly, I think, the reality of marketers, that, that investment has to come from somewhere, right? And again, like, I won't be so bold as to try to, kind of tell marketers where they can source the budget from, but I would invite them to do is really kind of look at how hard their marketing dollars are working relative to the CPM or pricing or what have you on channels like CTV, on things like social media, on these things that tend to be, otherwise like bread and butter types of digital activations. And again, I think if you apply some of the strategies and the methodologies that you're looking at those activations through some of these other digital channels that tend to be like high touch and, very provocative from a consumer standpoint and high attention and what have you, you'll find that not only is there a really good option on the gaming side, biases aside, of course, I would say that you'll find a superior option in the gaming side, both in terms of how it drives attention, how it drives outcomes for you. And I think also just kind of expanding your horizon to being more holistic across the entirety of the media ecosystem, where today gaming is one of the largest forms of entertainment in the world. So it just makes sense to make sure that your brand is tracking accordingly with something that is only growing importance in the lives of your consumer.
Let's wrap up by bringing it back to the beginning. So the last time we spoke, the metaverse was just on the tip of everybody's tongues. And I don't remember the last time anybody I spoke to talked about it in too much detail. What does the technology look like going forward, and what should we be excited? What are you excited about in the gaming space that brands should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I think metaverse, well, there's a lot of reasons why that conversation went away, but I think one of the principal ones is when we kept saying metaverse, what folks realized, all we were really saying was video games, because every example we brought up was a game. So I'd like to think that we actually got a little bit smarter about how we were framing that. And that's kind of the background. But what excites me is like, yes, there's going to be a ton of those opportunities of like these complex social worlds and what have you. And these are great. But realistically, the things that excite me are access. Like the more that we can allow for gaming fans today, or gaming fans potentially, to access this ecosystem, the better it is, obviously, from a publisher standpoint. But then that also opens up possibilities for brands. At Xbox, at Microsoft, we want to reach every person on the planet with the joy and community of gaming. And to do that, we're going to need help, and we're going to need partnership with brands.
Well, Jonathan Stringfield, thank you so much for joining me again today.
Thank you so much, John. Appreciate it.
And to the audience, thanks for joining us. I'm John DiOsto for Ad Age Studio 30. See you next time. Bye, everybody.